Morning, everybody. Again, a formal and official welcome. It's good to have you all here. Hopefully, this morning session is going to be really useful. I think you'll all agree that in our industry, the biggest challenge we face is to have a constant stream of qualified prospects, a constant stream of people that we can get to see. I think you'll all agree that if we've got those people, then actually getting to see them is much easier, and then obviously making the sale is much easier. Cold calling is a very difficult way to go, and sometimes a very painful way to go. So that's why I think this morning session will be so useful. So I'd like to welcome Sid Pimer. Sid runs a company called Strat Planning, and one of the things they do is teach people how to network properly and the importance of proper networking. He calls his talk. That's exactly what we all want to hear about. So welcome, Sid. I'm going to make you host, and I'm going to hand over to you to run this morning session. There we go.
Okay. Mark, thank you so much for this opportunity. You're quite right. I think referrals obviously is an important component of our pipelines, and there's been a major paradigm change with referrals. And there are two aspects of that paradigm change which have fed that. The one is legislation. We've seen POPI or POPIA. There's the TCF and a number of other legislations that have come in to protect people's privacy, which has suddenly become a very big issue. I remember when I first started in the late 90s emailing in those days we could bulk mail and we could spam. And people used to get incredibly upset sometimes if you spammed them in the early days, and they'd phone you and they'd complain. And I'm thinking, you buy the Sunday Times, half the Sunday Times is full of glossies this, glossies that, and they put stuff in your physical post box, and it's not a problem. So it's kind of a paradigm change towards protection of privacy in a different way than we used to. The other thing that has changed is our social structure. And if I look at the changes that show in a corporate world is the sudden emphasis on wellness. I think when lockdown happened, a lot of people didn't realize that working from home can be in its own way a hostile working environment. And just felt, well, okay, we can work at home, but they found out quite quickly that it doesn't work like that. So we see these drives now by organizations to wellness, and we do find it difficult to talk about it. We use terms like burnout. It has no medical meaning. It's kind of a nice way of talking about depression and anxiety, and it says, I work too hard, or you made me work too hard, and there's something really wrong with me. But we need to learn to talk about that. So I'm not going to cover that today. Today, we're going to look at referrals. There's, especially post-COVID. Now, because of the short time period, there's not that much research to go on. So at the end of my spiel, I'm really interested to get your specific feedback from the field. To jump right into it, there are two types of referrals. The one is network referrals, and the other one is personal referrals. And networking, I'm talking about instrumental business networking. Instrumental mean you're going for an outcome or a reason or a goal, business networking, whereas personal networking refers to the person that's sitting in front of you. They do overlap, and there's some things that apply to the other, but for purposes of this brief presentation, I'm going to cover those two areas. So let me look at the first one, which is networking referrals. Now, I know networking can sometimes come across as some of the research shows that people think of it as slightly dishonest, uncomfortable, and I, as CEO of the Cape Chamber for 7 years, one of our core services was networking. And only when I started studying afterwards did I realize the art and science of networking and what it actually means. And hopefully I'm going to clarify that now. Now, the results of business networking are in the literature. It's there. There's a positive correlation between networking agency and innovation, net asset value, growth, opportunity, and a number of other benefits. So the main problem with networking is we tend not to do it. And it's what's called the knowing doing gap. And the illustration of that's quite simple. We know we need to go to gym. Do we go? Well, I'm not going to answer that. That is the knowing doing gap. So why don't we act? Why don't we actively network as much as we should? I'm just going to go through the three reasons. There are a number of others in the research, but I'm just going to share three with you. The first is we don't understand the extent of our network. Now, I'm just going to go back to the 1970s, and there was a guy called Mark Granovetter, who's kind of the father of modern instrumental business networking. And he came up with SWT, which is a theory called the strength of weak ties, SWT. So what he did is he researched a number of people looking for jobs. And what he found was that those that activated weak ties were substantially more successful than those that stayed with close ties. And if you think back, the reasons, it seems quite logical. Who's going to know about an opportunity in your sector? Let's say you're in engineering, as an example. Is it the people around your dinner table, or some guy that you met 20 years ago that may or may not remember you, but you could contact him? He's in that sector. Who's going to know more? Your weak tie. And I'm going to give you a personal example. I applied to do my MBA in 1984, and I went for the interview, and I studied for the GMAT, and I thought my score was okay. And they asked me in the interview, so why have you chosen UCT? And I said, well, I don't know, the closest university to where I live. It didn't take long for the rejection letter to arrive. And when I got the rejection letter, I thought, hang on a minute, I really need to do this, because I didn't know where I was going in my life. And I knew that my brother-in-law, who was a pharmacist, and also my first qualification was pharmacy, my brother-in-law, who's a pharmacist, knew this other pharmacist who had a pharmacy in Sea Point that did his MBA and was still on the committee of the MBA school, one of the committees. So I thought, hang on a minute. So I go to his pharmacy and I say, David, his name was David Noll. I actually should recognize him. I've never mentioned his name before, because what he did changed my life. I said, David, listen, I really messed up. I went for the interview. I messed up the interview. Can you get me another one? Cut a long story short, he did. I went in very prepared. They asked me why UCT. I could go into the history of the organization. I had to do another 4-hour exam, and eventually I got in and managed to do my MBA in 1985. Why? Because I activated a weak tie. I also have to leave it precisely at 11 o'clock today because I activated a very weak tie. I don't know him particularly. I don't know him well at all. He's the ex-CEO of Old Mutual Alternative Investments. And I kind of named very vaguely, I probably know his wife better than I know him from Joburg. And I mailed him and I said, look, Paul, would you be prepared to have a cup of coffee? This is what I'm doing in the financial sector, but I really need to bump up some of the content because there's not that much research. And his answer came back, sure. So I'm meeting him in Camps Bay at 11:30. Waze says it'll take me 27 minutes. So I have to, unfortunately, leave at 11 precisely for a good reason for myself. The second reason why we don't act on networking is that acting without knowing means uncertainty. You don't know what really is going to happen. People go to these networking events, oh, I'm going to meet my target market, or I'm going to make a sale, or I'm going to really meet someone. It's not the reason you go to the conventional networking functions. You go to build up the most important capital that you have. It's not your house, it's not your car, it's social capital. Okay, and you can't predict. Those people who do really well embrace uncertainty. You know, I sometimes go to an event and there's kind of nothing really. Sometimes I go to an event and, you know, it's just not what I would be that interested in, or my target market, so to speak, wouldn't be there, but I make connections and I build up my social capital. Because if you look at some of the schemas of networks, they're what they call nodes, and between each node is a line. Now, if I want to get to node C, I can go and network and make contact with B, who's connected to C. I'm not connected to C, but that person might be connected in some way. And that's kind of very much my schema for the meeting with Paul later today in Camps Bay. So we must also understand that risk is natural. You know, uncertainty means risk. And the reason we've climbed to the top of the food chain is we avoid risk. You know, we check the parachute a few times. We, you know, drive on the left. You know, we don't go through red lights. Well, most of us don't, but we avoid risk. And that's how we get through life and live to a ripe old age. So it's a natural tendency that we have to overcome when it comes to networking, because networking is uncertain very often and infers risk. Then the third reason a lot of people don't go to networking events is they feel you need to be an extrovert. Well, I'm not a particularly good networker when it comes to the skills. I don't have a great filter. You know, I say stupid things like, is that your real hair? I mean, that was really bad, and I apologize for that. But I do it. And I think the reason I do it is I used to be the services manager for Link Pharmacies in the days we had 400 pharmacies and pharmacies made money. I had to manage the looks of the franchises, and we kind of tried to figure out what was separating the good performers from the bad performers, because it certainly wasn't the look and the adherence to our franchise guidelines. You know, some stores were a mess and did really well. Some stores looked great and the staff were trained and didn't do that well. So we got some guy in and he investigated this, and we got our 400 store owners to Sun City, and it was now time for him to deliver the verdict. And he said, look, it's pretty simple. Those guys who are doing well are doing the right thing. Those guys who aren't doing that well are doing things right. So the fact that I'm going to networking and I'm not that good at it, at least I'm doing the right thing. And that is correlated with a successful outcome. Well, in the experience that I have. And also we need to understand that networking is a verb and not a noun. Networking is an action. Okay. So you don't have to be right. You don't have to be wrong. You don't have to be great at it. You don't have to be an extrovert. But if you want to see results, you have to activate your networks, and you have to understand those three things: the extent of your network, the fact that it's risk, which we averse to naturally, and that it's not that dependent on your personality. So I now want to move to personal referrals. And this is a kind of a newer area for me, especially post-COVID. There's very little research, if any. We all feel kind of new in the game. And I think the old adage was, if you want a referral, ask for it. Now, the thing is, I remember I had some guy many years ago who sold me I think it was a short-term, I can't remember the policy. And at the end of the policy came the question, well, can you refer me to anyone else? And that made me very uncomfortable, with the result that I landed up with a few financial planners, because at the end of each session was that question and that challenge, which made me uncomfortable. And if you look at Dan Ariely's work, where we look at how a interaction ends and how important that is for the relationship, for me, it didn't work. But I think it did work, shall I call them the old days. And people that have got a solid customer base, and have been around from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, they probably still use the same methodology, and they're probably very successful because they've been in the business and they've stuck at it for so long. And we tend to emulate success. So if they're successful with I don't want to call it aggressive, but an assertive strategy, then surely we should follow that. And my hypothesis is no, I disagree with that. Somebody also told me that there was a strategy that once the person has signed the policy and they're happy, you ask them to take out their cell phone, go through their contacts, and once they and to give you 10 contacts, and the first person who speaks breaks. So look, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I haven't seen the facts on that, but it's certainly very uncomfortable and wouldn't enamor me to continue with that relationship. Okay, so there's a term in retail that says stock sells stock, and people who've got a substantial book probably still use the same methodologies, or probably very subtle methodologies, because if you've got a large book, getting referrals becomes an organic process. So what do we do today? My proposal is that we shift from a transactional data conversation to a transactional value conversation. And I'm going to give you a specific example. And Rail actually taught me a little of this as well. Thanks, Rail. So the normal experience would be to ask for a referral in the nicest way possible, maybe in a creative way. But what we would do now is that's a data transaction. So that's asking the client for something. You feel you've delivered something, the client's happy, so now they need to give you something. But it doesn't work like that, okay? It's the fact that you now need to change the conversation or the context of the conversation to transactional value. I'm going to give you a very specific example of that and how to do that. The way to end the conversation that was done with me that worked very well was, Sid, thank you so much. And is there anything else I can do for you? Okay. The financial planner didn't slip into, okay, I've done this for you. I did a great job. Look at all the trouble I went to. Now give me some notes, which is the undercurrent of what you're saying. The transactional value relationship. Okay, and you can take that to various degrees. You can say, so thanks very much. How can I help you with anything else? That's a general thing. Had you had banter and conversation and that client is in a specific sector, you could say, Sid, you know, it must be a challenge for you to be able to do this. I know this person. Can I help in any way? What you could also do is research the person beforehand. It's so easy today. You know, I mean, stalking and researching are becoming overlapping skills. But you can walk into that meeting, obviously as the person who needs to be able to give prudent financial guidance, but also the fact that you have researched the client and you've researched the client's needs, and you know you have to shift that conversation from transactional data, what can you do for me, to transactional value, what can I do for you? So also the work of Cialdini on reciprocity is also very interesting. So this transactional value conversation happened. And Rail actually said to me, he said, listen, you've told me all about the business. Is there any way I can help you and whatever? And he gave me a number. He gave me Mark's details. He said, you've got to phone Mark. He's the most amazing oak. Okay. Mark, he did use that word. And, you know, just speak to him, and that's why we're here today. And then we had this value transaction. Now, there's something in our genes, which has also helped us get to the top of the food chain, called reciprocity. So an example of that is when you go to people for dinner, what's the problem? Well, you kind of have to have them over for dinner, or you take a really expensive bottle of wine or something, because we're also programmed to reciprocate. We feel uncomfortable if we can't. So I'm sitting with Rael, and I said, Rael, I've got this one name, and I'm racking my brains now because Rael has given me Mark's details, he's given me ideas, he's given me all this kind of stuff, and I'm racking my brains, and we're running out of time, and Rael had to go, and I walked out of there feeling uncomfortable. What was my discomfort? I couldn't reciprocate the value part that had been tabled in our conversation. So there are going to be two outcomes. Either I will think of someone and then I'll send them to Rael, or if somebody says to me they have a need for financial services in any way, who's going to come top of mind? The reason he's going to come top of mind because it's a discomfort within me to be able to reciprocate. Okay. So just to end off, in the words of Ruth Stotter, people say we're made of flesh and blood and bones. Scientists say we're made of atoms, but I think we're made of stories. That's what we remember, the stories of our lives and the stories that we told. Guys, thank you so much. And I would be so interested in a discussion.